Hello, everyone. So last night, President Biden gave the State of the Union address to the nation. And as part of that address, he spoke about the urgency of getting humanitarian aid to the Palestinians in Gaza. As we well know, as we discussed in the last podcast, the U.S. has been doing some airdrops. First airdrop was about 38,000 meals ready to eat (MREs) that were dropped on Gaza. But the problem is it's a minor, it's minuscule compared to the need. The needs are, for over 2 million people. So 38,000 MREs isn't really doing anything. So we have to get a lot of aid in quickly. Now, how do we do that? How do we get this aid in quickly? Well, you have a couple of options. The first one is that, there's hundreds of trucks already preloaded with humanitarian aid sitting on the Egyptian side of the Rafah border that could easily go into Gaza and start providing relief to these civilians. Now, the problem with that is there's the settlers that have been sent down to the border crossing, and they've essentially blocked it. And Israel hasn't been cooperating in moving these settlers out of the way because of their, some of the ministers that they have are actually settlers. Ben-Gvir and Smotrich are settlers. They live in a settlement, and if Netanyahu acts against them, his government is going to fall. So he's sort of been checkmated into that decision. So nonetheless, the U.S. comes up with the Plan B, which the President mentioned in his State of the Union, is to build a temporary pier in Gaza. And from that pier, ships will, pull up to the pier, offload all the humanitarian supplies, and that should open up a pathway to help the Palestinian refugees. There's many problems with this strategy. First and foremost, he kind of gave contradictory guidance in the State of the Union. He talked about a temporary pier that he wanted to open in Gaza. And the second one he said was there's going to be no American boots on the ground. Now think about this. So this harkens back to the Kabul withdrawal. You got competing guidance and you're not understanding the dynamics on the ground of what is taking place and what the risks are to the operation. So to have a port operation that's ongoing, you need a lot of space and you need secure areas. So you offload these ships, you need a lot of cargo handling equipment, cranes and whatnot. Some ships do come with their own cranes. Others you need cranes on the ground to get all that supplies off the ship onto the ground. Then you need a transit point where these supplies are reloaded onto vehicles and distributed throughout Gaza. So you need a safe, secure yard where these goods can be handled and reloaded onto trucks. You need ground handling equipment for that. And then all this stuff has to have force protection around it, because otherwise, you've got 2 million starving people in Gaza. They show up at the port and they mob the port. Then what happens? You got a riot control situation, a la Kabul withdrawal. And if Hamas or some other nefarious organization decides to target that pier or those ships, to create an international incident, then what happens? So the notion that you can have a pier and no boots on the ground are contradictory guidance. You got to have force protection in there. Now the IDF certainly will probably be protecting the perimeter, but what about the distribution part of this equation? When you offload the ships, what happens to those supplies? How do you get them to the Palestinians? Because you certainly don't want 2 million Palestinians coming to this pier. You're going to have chaos on your hands. You need to have them stay in their places and get the supplies to them. So that's a big factor that needs to be thought through. The other thing we need to really think about is mission creep. So, let's just say that, we're offloading these ships, an incident happens, we need to get more troops on the ground for force protection to protect the pier, protect the ship, and then all of a sudden the U.S. gets embroiled with troops on the ground. And as it is, the U.S. is not viewed in a favorable light by the Palestinians. And quite frankly, I don't blame them, because, we've been bombing the crap out of them, giving, something like 45,000 bombs to Israel, and then all of a sudden we start these humanitarian drops, and now we want to build a pier. So, essentially, really, in their psychology, on a Monday we're giving Israel bombs. On a Tuesday, we're giving the refugees food. So it makes no sense. On the one hand, we're bombing them. On the other hand, we're giving them food. Not a good position to be in. So what can we do to enhance our posture in the Gaza? We don't want to create another Kabul withdrawal circumstance. That's my biggest fear, and that's the biggest risk, because you've got a massive population there that's hungry, that's desperate, and they can certainly determine the outcome of this whole operation. So it's not up to President Biden or the Department of Defense. And we've seen the type of leadership that we saw during the Kabul withdrawal. They were disengaged, and they were a day late, dollar short. So this really hasn't been thought through. And if I was advising the President of the United States, which won't happen, but I would definitely tell him, hey, this is a dumb idea. It's sort of like climbing Mount Everest backwards. It's hard enough climbing it, forwards. Trying to climb it backwards is just dumb. And the reason for that is because the right answer is open up the Rafah crossing, get those trucks in, get all the aid organizations into Gaza to help these people out. And while all this is going on, work towards a permanent ceasefire. The president has called for a temporary ceasefire, for 6 weeks. Well, that's not going to work because, it's just going to recreate the whole situation again. So the idea is to get a permanent ceasefire, and we need to stop vetoing the UN Security Council resolutions for ceasefire. We've already vetoed 3 of them. That makes no sense to me. The idea is the United States should stand for our constitutional values. Those values, quite simply, are equality, freedom, and human rights. That's what the United States stands for. But unfortunately, in this case, because of our symbiotic relationship with Israel, we've sort of let them lead us into this quagmire right now, which could turn into a disaster. So we need to think it through before we go jumping into another phase of this operation, building piers and stuff, and it blows up in our face. So the right answer is open up the Rafah crossing, get those trucks into Gaza, and a permanent ceasefire, and then we need to think through of how we're going to establish the Palestinian state. We've been talking about it for decades and just basically ignored it, hoping to wish away this problem. It's not going away. And we solve it in a rational manner where both sides learn to coexist. That's the only way it's going to happen. You can't have one side oppressing and occupying, the other side, and then we got to impose a peace. That's it. The world is imposing a peace. It doesn't matter what the Palestinians want. It doesn't matter what the Israelis want. It matters what the world wants now. The world has had enough of this ulcer, and we need to move forward with the Palestinian state. At the end of the day, I hope this plan works out, because you certainly don't want more people losing their lives over it. You don't want any U.S. service members losing their lives over it, as we did in Kabul. Poorly planned mission. It was contradictory guidance, which is another podcast that we can talk about, what should have been done differently. And again, here, we have to be very careful that we don't end up in a trap. I do hope the National Security Council, the President, and the Department of Defense, you've got some sage minds working there that understand the dynamics of this, and they're just not sycophants. They're saying yes sir to President Biden, and they're giving them the unvarnished truth. And the unvarnished truth is this is a very, very risky operation, and we need to think it through. I would not consider this to be my most favorable course of action. The most favorable course of action for us is open up the Rafah border. That's the most favorable course of action. The most favorable course of action for us is a ceasefire. And lastly, Palestinian statehood. That's all I got. Stay rugged. Khan out.